The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference. I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. I am so pleased to have Jonathan Tobin on my show. You know, he is a man who really understands what's going on in the world. And when I talk about what's going on in the world, I really mean anti-Semitism. You know, when you talk about anti-Semitism, you think about the times where Hitler was alive and what he was saying, what he was doing, and people in Germany were doing the same thing. You know, today you would say to yourself, why would they hate the Jews as much as they do? And that's my question to you, Jonathan. Why is there so much anti-Semitism around the world?
Well, that's the eternal question. And to some extent, it will always be a mystery. I think the Jews have, for the last 2 millennia, been sort of the boogeymen of the Western imagination and the Eastern as well. I think we have to understand that, some fundamental principles is that anti-Semitism is always about the anti-Semites, not a reaction to what the Jews are doing or not doing. Jews have been hated for being rich and hated for being poor, hated for assimilating into non-Jewish society and hated for remaining separate. It's always about the haters. It is, as the great scholar Ruth Weiss has taught, it's not an ordinary form of prejudice. It's not, and that's part of the problem with a lot of our Holocaust education programs in this country. It's not merely just another form of being mean to other people. It's a way of organizing politics. It's a way of organizing thought. And it goes much deeper. And so it continues. And it is, as Professor Weiss also taught, was the most successful ideology of the 20th century because it's a virus. It was able to attach itself to other ideologies, whether it was fascism, Nazism, communism, and in the last part of the last century and the beginning of this one, to Islamism. It is an all-purpose hatred, and that is why it is so persistent. That is why it remains to some extent a mystery, and it's very hard for people, especially Jews, to understand or react properly to, because it is not about what they are doing. It is not, it's not a reaction to that. It is about something else.
You know, Jonathan, one of the things that I think is so important is that we teach our kids what happened. It's a historical issue that I think is really important, and I think it needs to be in schools, because needless to say, if kids are given information about all of these different things that you just talked about, such as, you know, the hating people. I'm just going to say hating people. I mean, the Muslims, there is a situation today where there's a lot of hatred toward them. There's Black Lives Matter, which people think that there's still a lot of a bias toward Blacks. So the question becomes, when do you start teaching kids, what age, to really start to respect all people?
Well, I don't think that you can start too young with teaching teaching children to respect other people. It should be part of anyone's education. It's part of being a decent human being, no matter what your faith or your background. And that's not the issue. I think the problem is that when we sort of subsume Holocaust education, which is about a specific event, a specific set of events, into, as I say, just sort of a general, don't be mean to other people, which of course, you shouldn't be mean to other people. It tends to dumb down the discussion, and the people ask, why are there so many inappropriate Holocaust analogies made? Why do so many people bring that up? Whether it is some people on the right who compare vaccine mandates, whatever your opinion about them, to what happened during the Holocaust, to people on the left who, conspicuously, use the Holocaust to damn all of their political opponents. We were living in a time when basically everybody I don't like is Hitler is the way people approach it. And, that's a mistake, but it's a mistake that's rooted, I think, partially in the fact that we have a sort of popularized knowledge of the Holocaust, but not popularized a really good understanding. So the Holocaust has just become an all-purpose metaphor for anything that people think is awful, or anyone that people think is awful. So you have this thing where people compare Donald Trump to Hitler. He wasn't an anti-Semite. He was, in fact, the best friend Israel has ever had in the White House, or whatever you may think of him, whatever his other flaws may be. And people on the right do some of the same things, and that's why. I mean, it's why it's just used so wrongly, because we've kind of sent the wrong message on that.
Yeah. Today, the Israelis, and I'm glad you brought up the Israelis, because I have quite a few Israeli friends. And when I talk to them about, the fact that so many countries around the world are against Israel, there's a kind of jealousy, if you will, because the Israelis have this kind of attitude that they can just have of a sense of themselves, and they don't care. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, Jonathan, because you travel around the world and you talk to a lot of Israelis, but the point is that they say, look, we are a small country, and we're not going to stand for anybody hating us like that. And if they do, that's their problem, not our problem. So I'm wondering, when you speak to some of the people in the administration of Israel, what do they have to say to you?
Well, I think you're reflecting, it's sort of a traditional Zionist attitude that dates back to Ben-Gurion, whose attitude, and it was a good one. It was like, don't worry about what the non-Jews say, just worry about what we're doing. Just go ahead, do what we need to do. Don't worry about the outside world. And there's a lot of strength in that, and there's a lot of sense in that. And indeed, it is a small country. It cannot worry all the time about who hates it. It can't obsess about it. And those who do are making a mistake. That so that's partly sort of a healthy self-confidence, a healthy self-reliance. What I think some people in Israel, especially, in its foreign ministry, some of the people responsible for dealing with foreign relations, sometimes don't understand is that when you allow sort of myths and lies about Israel to go unanswered, to be allowed to propagate, that has a tremendous impact. In the end, it comes back to bite you. You can't let these things go unanswered. And, it affects everyone. It affects Jews elsewhere in the world as well. The apartheid state lie is a lie. It's a canard. It is, it's not based in any truth. The idea that Israel is like the former apartheid regime in South Africa. And, Israelis just sort of laugh about it to some extent, but it fuels hatred against them, and they're wrong not to think that matters. And if because with much of Europe lining up against Israel time and again, and sort of academic elites around the world, including this country, buying into sort of intersectional myths rooted in critical race theory, a very important controversy in our country right now. These things act like a permission slip for anti-Semitism. And as I said, they can't be allowed to go unanswered. They must be debunked. They must be opposed vigorously. And that's good for the security of Israel and its standing in the world. But it's even more important for American Jews to understand that allowing these ideas to propagate threatens them.
Yeah.
And more so even more so than even Israel. It's like with the BDS movement, the movement to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. That movement hasn't laid a glove, to use the boxing metaphor, on Israel's first world startup economy. I mean, Israelis do right to laugh at it, but who does it really target? It targets American Jews.
Yeah.
It seeks to isolate them, shun them, silence them. That's why it's not a minor thing. It's important.
Yeah, Jonathan, there is such a thing, and I hate to say this, but Jews seem to even hate themselves. I don't know where that came from. I wonder, and I'm sure that you have an answer, because these are like Jews hating Jews. And why? And the question becomes, why does that happen? What is it about Jewish people that they can't really kind of just say, we're a usual people. We have a lot of education. We go to school to learn and to work and to really love our families. I'm interested in understanding why that is the case, Jonathan, that we hate each other or we hate ourselves. Do you think that's true or not?
Well, the old, it's sort of an insult to call someone a self-hating Jew. And most of the people that barb is aimed at, I think the truth is they love themselves. They like themselves very well. They just don't like the rest of us. It boils down to it's not something that is limited to just Jews alone. I mean, Gilbert and Sullivan, there's a line in the Mikado about people who admire every country but their own. So the English knew about it in the 19th century as well. It's especially prevalent among Jews because there is within Judaism, it always has been within Judaism, two, and not conflicting, but two parallel strains, two ideas that are both part of Jewish identity, about Jewish thought, and that is universalism and a particularism. Judaism is universal because the God of Israel is the God of the whole world. The moral laws set down in the Ten Commandments are for everybody, not just the Jews. And that was a very unusual attitude in the ancient world. But at the same time, along with this universalist strain, there is a particularist element of Judaism. It is about a particular people, about a particular land, about a particular set of laws that only applies to those who identify as Jews. And I think especially here in the United States, where, this is a country that was built on the idea of openness to everyone. Any kind of sectarianism has always been, to some of one sort or another, has always been to some extent seen as disreputable. And I think the overwhelming majority of American Jews who are politically liberal tend to view their Judaism, their Jewish identity, almost solely through the universalist strain. They have a lot of discomfort with sort of particularist Judaism. That's why so many of them don't really understand Israel, which is it's a small country for a people. It's not a universal homeland, the last best hope of mankind on earth, as Americans have always seen their country. So I think part of it is rooted in that conflict between universalism and the particular. The great writer Cynthia Ozick once said that universalism is the particularism of the Jews, and I think that there was a lot of truth to that. And it's about discomfort, and also it has to do with what we were talking about before, which is anti-Semitism. I think many Jews react to anti-Semitism by internalizing it, and that has always been true, and looking to blame themselves. People blame Israel for anti-Semitism as if the anti-Semites needed any excuse. They don't need any excuse. They'll seize on any that there is. And I think this is a very foolish and self-destructive strain within the Jewish community, but it is one which can't be ignored. We have groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, which masquerades as sort of a human rights group, but which is anti-Zionist. It supports the destruction of Israel, and it even, sadly, helps spread anti-Semitic blood libels. It's kind of nuts, but it goes with their worldview, and it's a very dangerous. It's a very dangerous trend, and it's something we need to identify, point out and oppose.
Yeah. Jonathan, I had an uncle who worked for the American Jewish Committee. And I remember when I was very young going to the Waldorf Astoria in New York, and the person who he was with was Eleanor Roosevelt. I mean, I'm dating myself, as you can see, but I was a little girl. And for me, just to meet somebody like Eleanor Roosevelt was just absolutely outstanding. Now, my uncle used to say to me that the job of the Jews is to go around and to educate people, to make people understand who we are, and to really get rid of some of the hatred that exists. I remember this. Now, where are the organizations today, like the American Jewish Committee, and you named some of the others, and what are they doing about all of this hatred that is going on in the world?
Well, I think they would claim that they're doing their best to combat it. I think some do better than others. I think the AJ committee tries. I'm not sure really that it still has a raison d'etre, to exist. It's just, it's sort of a mildly liberal national Jewish group, does some good, tries to do good. We have a better example of this problem is the Antidefamation League, which is it's the one national Jewish group that really does have a job, you could say, which is to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. But I believe it's largely abandoned that role in favor of one as just another liberal, partisan group. It's run, I had my disagreements at times with its former head, Abe Foxman, but he was someone with deep Jewish sensibilities, understood the world, was a proud Jew, loved Israel. He was succeeded by someone in the form of Jonathan Greenblatt, who is, he's an ex-Democratic Party operative from the Clinton and Obama administrations. And he's just about, mobilizing the Jews to fight the war for the Democrats, which if you're a Democrat sounds like not such a bad idea. But that's not what that's not what we need an ADL for. And unfortunately, we know that that's not the only example. We have the Jewish Council on Public Affairs, which is the association of Jewish community relations councils around the country in North America. And, in its desire to be loved and to make allies with former partners of the Jewish community and in the minority communities, I mean, it's endorsed the Black Lives Matter movement and critical race theory, which are both, the Black Lives Matter contains very anti-Semitic elements, and critical race theory basically acts as a permission slip for anti-Semitism because it identifies Jews in Israel as possessors of white privilege. It wrongly analogizes the Palestinian war to destroy Israel with the struggle for civil rights in this country, which is nuts and deeply wrong. And I think it's not just that they're wrong, not just that they're making mistakes, it's that they're on the wrong track. The deal in this country right now, we're living in one of the most hyper-partisan moments in American history. And for many people, politics has taken on the role that religion used to play in their lives. And everything is about politics and everything is about partisanship. And Jews are no different than anybody else in this country in that respect. And I think many Jews are no longer really defending or that interested in Jewish interests. They're just interested in going to war against their political opponents. Mm-hmm. And I think that's it's a profound mistake, and certainly not in the interest of the Jewish community. But it also represents a really toxic impact on political discourse in this country. We've lost the ability to listen to each other, and as a result, we're demonizing each other and have lost the ability to credit each other with good motives. And I think when Jews substitute that kind of toxic partisanship for defense of Jewish interests, we see the results.
Yeah. Jonathan, one of the things that I notice is that there's a separation, and I'm talking about faith. There was a time, I think it was really in my grandmother's time. I'm a second generation person here in the country. I mean, I felt very strongly about my religion at some point. Not that I'm a cultural Jew. I'm not a really religious Jew, but what I'm finding out is that the Jewish faith is losing its, I don't know what to say about this, Jonathan. My son, as a person, is a great example. He married out of the religion. And when you talk about, Judaism and all the holidays and all the beautiful things that it stands for, he just says, I don't care. Now, I'm not saying that, there aren't a lot of people who really believe in Judaism, whether they're reformed, whether they're conservative, or whether they're very religious, but Judaism is losing its people. What do you attribute to that?
Well, you're just stating the facts, as every demographic survey of the last 30 years has shown, and it's a problem that's grown worse. All the surveys show that increasingly large numbers of Jews no longer have any real affinity for the traditional indicators of Jewish identity, which is Jewish law, faith, the idea of Jews taking care of each other, identification with Israel. We have become, certainly in this country, much more assimilated. This has to do with, exponential intermarriage rates, but also, a demographic trends, which I alluded to before, in which, Jewish identity is subsumed into some sort of, and redefined as just sort of, sort of a loose liberalism. I mean, for many Jews, Judaism is the Democratic Party platform with holidays thrown in. But whether you think that or some other version, on the other side of the spectrum, what we're seeing is, something very fundamental, and it's a loss of a sense of Jewish peoplehood, of understanding what my mother, of blessed memory, would have called the Pintelai, the Jew inside you, that was instinctive to people who grew up in previous generations, when Jews were separated from other people, whether from anti-Semitism or because they were immigrants and the children of immigrants. We have assimilated into this country, and part of it is rooted in something good. It's about freedom. It's as much as we worry about anti-Semitism, this is still a philo-Semitic country. This is not Europe. We have a lot of friends, and quite frankly, religious prejudice is down. If intermarriage is up, it's not just because Jews want to marry non-Jews, it's because non-Jews want to marry Jews. And they wouldn't feel that way if they hated us. So, as I say, there's good and bad in that. But we have a community, especially the vast majority of Jews who are non-Orthodox, which is kind of imploding demographically. And the consequences to that, I think, are fairly obvious. We've been talking about it, for, as I say, 30 years since the 1990 Jewish population survey came out. And, there was a flurry of hysteria within the organized Jewish world because, Jewish Federation execs realized that maybe nobody'd be around to pay their salaries in a few years. And then it turned out those numbers were actually low compared to where we are now. But, all the things that people worried about 30 years ago were there already. We're facing it, and we're facing the consequences, and what you're describing is real. The answer, there's no magic answer to it, because we are living in a free country. People can opt out, and they have that right. The only thing we can do is to promote Jewish education, educational experiences like trips to Israel, Jewish camps, and to foster a sense of Jewish identity and Jewish knowledge. When that happens, our chances are better of retaining a lot of our community and of the next generation. But as the demographers say, the fastest growing group of Jews in this country are quote unquote Jews of no religion, which is another way of saying these are people with 1 foot or 1.5 feet out of the community. And, before long, these are people who merely will have had Jewish, ancestors and will have some connection to something Jewish, perhaps, but not in any real sense, a Jewish identity.
Well, Jonathan, I always like to give my guests the last word, and I'm sure that you have something that you want to tell our audience, because what I hear from you is so interesting and so important. But let's hear what the last word is, because I think people, when they listen to this show, will really remember what you said in the last part of the show. So what is the last word that you want to give our audience?
Well, I think the most important thing they should take away with is to have faith in the Jewish future, have faith in this country. That's very hard to do sometimes because, it does seem at times as if, the country's going to hell in a handbasket. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. But, the Jewish people are not alone in this country. There is a strong bedrock of philo-Semitic attitudes in this country. I believe deeply in American exceptionalism. America is not like the rest of the world, although we have our problems and there is anti-Semitism. There is still a strong wellspring of support for Israel among non-Jews in this country. I like to say the first president to endorse a Jewish state wasn't Harry Truman or Woodrow Wilson, it was John Adams. So we should have faith, know that we're not alone, know that if we speak up, we won't be alone, and to have the courage to speak up against anti-Semites, whether from the left or the right, to go against fashion. The essence of being Jewish has always been a willingness and an imperative to stand up against the idols of popular culture in any age. That was true of the Maccabees. It's true of us today, too. And that is something that we should remember. And if we do, and with God's help, I have a lot of faith that not only will Israel continue to thrive, but American Jewry will face up to its problems as well.
Well, do you have a book out, Jonathan, or how do people read some of the things that you say, and any other thing?
Well, I don't have a book out now, but I encourage people to go to jns.org. You can read my columns there every day, pick up my weekly podcast, subscribe to our newsletter, contribute, help us keep going, and do the work that, giving news, giving accurate, fair news in a way that you really don't get anywhere else. So go to jns.org and you can read what I'm saying pretty much every day.
I want to thank you, Jonathan Tobin, for being on the Susan Brender Show. It was a very interesting show, and a lot of people have a lot to learn. So thank you very much for being on the Susan Brender Show. It was really a pleasure.
Thanks very much for having me.